Hello, and welcome to Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear AI researchers chat about what's actually going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we'll provide summaries and discussion of some of last week's most interesting AI news. You can also check out our Last Week in AI newsletter over at lastweekin.ai for articles we didn't cover in this episode. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Sharon Zhou.
And I am your other host, Andrei Krykov. And in this episode, we will discuss some AI for manufacturing and for detecting and predicting shifting sea ice. We'll discuss research on tactile sensors and more fine-grained emotional classification. We'll talk about Facebook shutting out its facial recognition system, Google wanting to work with the military again, and a bit on Clearview. And finally, we'll finish with some fun things about AI for boxing and cooking.
And our first article in Application/Business is about Landing AI, which is my advisor's company, Andrew Ng's company. So the article is titled, Landing AI Brings in $57 million for its machine learning operations tools. All right, so Landing AI just announced a Series A funding of $57 million to continue building tools that help manufacturers more easily build and deploy AI systems. And specifically, they look at finding defects more quickly and more accurately. This is the progression of this company as it grows. It's a very large Series A round. I think some people think of it as even just a later stage round, even though it's called Series A. But what's challenging in manufacturing is that, every factory does something different. So it's really hard to build out a product that all of them find very, very useful. They build a very different product or manufacture a very different product oftentimes.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. I think this is a very kind of intuitive application of AI, of this sort of inspection to find defects. Basically, you look at an image of a product or a chip or, I don't know, some license plate and figure out, is it in good shape or not? So pretty straightforward. And as you said, the challenge is actually just making it work in all these various settings. As I said, the problem becomes how we can help 10,000 manufacturers build 10,000 different models. So it's cool to see they're getting to Series A after building out this product a year ago. I was kind of curious in this. They said we kicked off a data-centric AI movement and are quite pleased that other companies have started talking about it. Do you know what data-centric AI is, Sharon?
So actually, this is connected with a workshop that we are organizing together at NeurIPS called the Data-Centric AI Workshop.
Okay, so you should know.
So I should know. So basically, it's about... there's so much work on, improving models. And I think that's been taking the highlight. But in reality, when it comes to these applications, it's often the heavy lifting done in data where we do a lot of our work when it comes to applying AI and deploying AI systems. In fact, there's jokes about people saying, I spend 90% of my time on data engineering and then 10% of my time actually training models. And I think that in large part is actually very true when it comes to deploying these systems. I think that maybe is slightly less true in research, but even in research, we feel that. Unless we're working only with the very nice manicured data sets, this is very much the case of getting something to work on data that matters.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. I think even in research, there's a bit less appreciation, I suppose, of papers that are mainly about introducing a data set or, introducing data. Now it's changing a little bit. There's also a benchmarks track at NeurIPS.
Right.
So yeah, it's a logical shift. And I guess a logical area for this specific problem area, right? Where you're doing all this specialization to different contexts.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So on to our second article on applications of AI. We have as the Arctic warms, AI forecasts scope out shifting sea ice. So a bit more of a bummer, but I guess AI is turning out useful here. Of course, we have climate change, and Arctic air and water has warmed 3 times faster than the rest of the planet since 1971. So, it's obviously now important to keep track of the state of the Arctic and kind of the rapidly happening changes there. And so this article is all about how, in addition to existing simulators and models that are using physics to understand what's happening, the AI algorithms are also kind of complicating that. So there's, as the title says, AI-based forecast models that are better able to adapt quickly as there is more uncertain pace of climate change, and it's kind of hard to adopt these existing tools.
Yeah, it is definitely sad that the Arctic is warming and the sea ice is shifting at the very least, if not, being reduced. And this is very much impacting, all the environmental processes, the wildlife that rely on it, as well as I believe it also is, changing, how tribal members are in commercial fishers and how people are engaging with it, as well as with certain natural resources like oil. And so I think it's great that people are using AI towards this. The specific model is a UNet. So if you're familiar with that, it's pretty standard model that people often use across, all sorts of different domains. And I'm glad they're starting to apply it here. So it's not perfect. It's a pretty simple model that came out a while back, but it is important that we're starting to use things like this now.
Yeah. So this is this article covers this paper, Seasonal Arctic Sea Ice Forecasting with Probabilistic Deep Learning, and this one of the people here that we got a quote from is Thomas Anderson, a data scientist at the British Antarctic Survey, who created this IceNet model and said that it can run thousands of times faster and also learn to complement the physics-based model. I also found it interesting that in addition to that, the article also covers the work of Polarctic, a company whose CEO is Leslie Canavera, who is actually a tribal member of this Yupik tribe and who grew up in Alaska. And they are likewise working on this problem. So at least, people are working to get better forecasting. And as the article notes, it's increasingly important for tribal members who are doing commercial fishing in the area and also global shipping companies. So, another useful application of AI in a rapidly changing world.
And on to our research articles. The first one is why Facebook, or Meta, is making tactile sensors for robots. So if you haven't forgotten, it's hard to forget now that Facebook rebranded to Meta. But they have come out with some interesting blog posts. One is teaching robots to perceive, understand, and interact through touch. And the other one that's relevant here is called Reskin, a versatile, replaceable, low-cost skin for AI research on tactile perception. So this is pretty exciting work around, adding a skin to a robot hand to help with sensing. And this tactile sensing is super important for it to be able to pick up objects of different varying amounts of, fragility or being just as much as dexterous, or not as dexterous, but as careful as like what a human hand would do. And I think the great marketing photo that's being shown for Meta here is a robot, trying to pick up an egg, and without their special touch sensing, it cracks. But the robot can actually pick up an egg without it cracking using this skin. Thoughts on this, Andre, as a roboticist?
Yeah, this is very exciting. I think I've seen some other people in robotics get excited for this. They're partnering with GelSight, who they've introduced this digit sensor that is kind of building upon something that's been in the works for a while. And they're going to commercially manufacture it. So that's pretty sweet, because now, you don't need access to prototypes. You can just buy these sensors. And obviously having them for manipulating objects, we use this a ton. We need the tactile sensing, the feelings of pressure, of texture, as we make contact with stuff. And this reskin thing seems to be more of a prototype that is similar, but can be stretched out over larger surfaces. The GelSight thing is more like the end of your fingers have this stuff. So thoughts are that this was a pretty big announcement and pretty exciting for the world of robotics. And they even also released a library called PyTouch for learning machine learning models for these tactile sensors. And they release Tactile, a simulator for high-resolution vision-based tactile sensors. Yeah, so they've done quite a bit of work here, and definitely this is, kind of a big deal. It's also interesting that this is Facebook or Meta, because they haven't worked on much robotics, especially not robotics that involves hands and moving, stuff with robotic hands. But they have been expanding that department, so I guess this shows that.
And I think it makes a lot of sense that they're expanding, actually, because given their rebranding to Meta, they're thinking about, the metaverse and like VR, and very much pushing on Oculus. And I think this fits into that in a way. It'll enable, they want to enable, all the tactile, every kind of sensation in that world, or more, arguably. And so I think it makes sense that they're moving in this direction.
Yeah, that's a good point. These sensors could come in handy outside of robotics, probably, and possibly even like teleoperating robotic arms would be very useful. When we were starting out, we were chatting. I think, as a person not in robotics, I think you had no idea that this kind of sensor was like still a big challenge in the hardware of robotics. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing them like 5 years ago, but as wearable skins on people's skin, and so I just hadn't seen these skins be added to robots, and I wasn't sure like how useful that would be. And so seeing this is really exciting, because I do think this has been a big bottleneck in robotics in terms of this type of ability when it comes to tactile sensing. So yeah, my sense is this is cool, especially since your excitement corroborates that.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where, we used to have gigantic phones and cell phones in the 90s, and we had, gigantic sensors, but now they're becoming more miniature and more useful. So it is a pretty exciting development.
Right.
And on to our second research story. We have Google AI introduces GoEmotions, an NLP dataset for fine-grained emotion classification. So this is talking about the paper GoEmotions, a dataset of fine-grained emotions, basically, as we said. And it's all about this new dataset of 58,000 Reddit comments from popular English language subreddits that have been labeled with 27 emotion categories. So usually in sentiment classification, a lot of work has been done on just positive, negative, right? And I don't know, maybe there's been some other extensions of that, but here they really get into a large amount. So in contrast to even a basic 6 emotion model, which is kind of popular in psychology, they include 12 positive, 11 negative, and 4 ambiguous emotion categories, as well as 1 neutral one. So some examples are, in the positive camp, you have amusement, caring, excitement, relief. In the negative side, you have annoyance, disgust, grief, remorse. And on the ambiguous, not positive or negative, you have realization, surprise, and curiosity. So yeah, I found it pretty fun to see this. Pretty useful, I would imagine, for all sorts of things in social media. What do you think, Sharon?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a step in this direction. It makes complete sense to me. I'm actually surprised we didn't have this sooner, because I think it's a fairly natural step to do finer grained emotion classification. Maybe it's just around getting the data set together and some momentum around that.
Yeah, I think it's part of the challenge is, of course, just being able to collect and annotate this data well. And this is coming from Google, so they have the resources clearly. And one thing I like, if you go to the table, it's kind of a fun paper to read, because they have a lot of these tables breaking down all the emotions and different results and stuff like that. And some discussion of how they wound up at 26. And in fact, they actually have one of their findings is that each component is significant. So each emotion captures a unique part of the data. There's no redundant emotions, which kind of supports their work. Also, one thing that is kind of fun is they have a breakdown of the amount of each emotion, number of examples. So you have a lot of comments with admiration and approval. I don't know what subreddits they went to that for. And then you have annoyance and disapproval. So that seems more like Reddit to me.
I'm surprised their sarcasm is not one, honestly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's hard to
I guess
categorize
it's not exactly an emotion per se. It's more like something you can communicate, but
disgust? Anyway. I don't know. But if you see a sarcastic remark, what do you...
Yeah.
I don't even know what to actually categorize that as,
Right, exactly. Yeah, so that kind of shows how it's tricky. It was also nice to see that they did discuss filtering bad data and making sure there's no toxic or offensive or these sorts of things. Yeah, so overall exciting work, useful to this area, and I would imagine will, as a data set, enable quite a bit of follow-up work.
Right. And on to our society and ethics articles. The first one is Facebook citing societal concerns, plans to shut down facial recognition system. All right. So this is a pretty big kind of shock to a lot of people, but Facebook actually does plan to shut down their decade-old facial recognition system. And that not only means that they won't keep doing it, but they actually delete the data of more than 1 billion users. So they're going to just eliminate that feature. And this is very much a reaction to what they've been in the news for, the government investigations, the lawsuit, et cetera. So I think despite, being a reaction, I'm still surprised at this, that this did happen.
Yeah, exactly. I think it took a lot of people by surprise. A lot of privacy advocates kind of celebrated this. I was surprised to see that the change affects more than a third of Facebook's daily users who had facial recognition turned on. My impression is this was turned on for most people. I'm not sure what that means. It's a feature that I've used. I'm guessing you might have used as well. So it's comes as a bit of a surprise, also given how long we've been doing it, how much we invested in it. But as you said, I think to me it feels like trying to shift the narrative away from all the negativity and sort of the distrust and so on. And still, though, it is a positive development in the sense of, our privacy gets one little nudge towards the company not knowing everything about us, which I guess is a good thing.
Right. And that said, the article does note that this doesn't mean that Facebook is ruling out using facial recognition in the future, and that they will still keep their software that does it, Deepface. And so they'll delete all the data now, but moving forward, there might come a time when it does come back, when times change, perhaps, I don't know, or ways in which we can include it improve, like regulatory things do pass and people agree with that.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that aside from privacy concerns, there's some regulatory problems, especially in Europe and elsewhere. Even if it's only internal use, there's been some legal things there. And I think with Clearview AI, as we've discussed, maybe that also prompted them. So it's not a purely altruistic move, but nevertheless, I think we would agree it is a positive development. And onto a story that might be a little less positive. We have Google wants to work with the Pentagon again, despite employee concerns. So this is an interesting development. 3 years ago, there was an employee revolt, basically, that forced Google to abandon work on a Pentagon program that uses AI. And after they've done that, now they are aggressively pursuing a major contract to provide its technology to the military. So this potentially lucrative contract is known as the Joint Warfighting Cloud capability, and it aims to modernize the Pentagon's cloud technology and support the use of AI to gain an advantage on the battlefield. Kind of a broad goal there. And it's actually replacing a contract with Microsoft that was canceled. So it's kind of currently in the process of being competed for. And yes, you must imagine that this will be pretty lucrative if they get it. But it's still interesting that they're trying for it again after having had this history of their employees not liking it.
Yep, we'll see where this goes. I can imagine that, I don't know. I think like Google has changed and has put out a stance on its ethics in some way that's slightly different than before. So we'll see where that goes. And it sounds like, other large tech companies have had, issues with this too. Yeah, we'll see where this goes.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. This article also covers the background pretty well, aside from the revolt. After that, Google announced a set of ethical principles that would govern its use of AI, in part because of that whole thing. And they said that they would now not allow its AI to be used for weapons or surveillance, which I guess technically it's not with this cloud contract, but indirectly, you're helping the military. And apparently, Google has already signed contracts with the U.S. Air Force for cloud computing and the U.S. Navy for AI. Again, not for weaponry, but still kind of military-related things. So it's a gray area, right? Can you do anything with a military, even if it's not combat? I actually feel a little split on it myself. I don't think it's necessarily bad, but this is sure to be a controversial move, and we'll see how people respond.
Yes, it's definitely not black and white. And some Google employees still think, this doesn't violate those principles. And, the principles like like you mentioned, say that, AI can't be applied to weapons or those that direct injury. So yeah, we'll see. This is coming at a time when employees are already pushing against the Project Nimbus contract, which is the contract with the Israeli military to help, government entities through Israel using Google services. So it's a matter of like how much is, giving the platform and generic use of cloud and AI versus for something specific. And what entities in the government specifically as well. So, or applications within the DoD. But yeah. Oh, sure. And on to our next article. Australia ordered Clearview AI to destroy its database as it's violating privacy law. All right. At long last, Clearview gets a no from a large government. So Australia said, Clearview AI needs to stop its business there, according to its privacy laws, and it needs to stop all services in Australia, as well as destroy the database of biometric data of all the Australian citizens. So very big kind of push against a Clearview. What do you think?
Yeah, it's, I guess, a win for us. I think we're both not big fans of Clearview and its practices in terms of they scrape really data from all over the internet without any sort of, asking people if they want to be in a database. And so here, this is a pretty strong stance against it. I wonder how many times we've talked about Clearview AI. It's got to be 24 or so already. So I don't know. I guess it's funny to see how much this company gets in trouble and, all the various ways that governments are challenging it. It'll be interesting to see how long it will take for things to finally settle down and, for the law on this to become clear.
Yep, we shall see. Clearview AI might arguably be it's definitely one of our top companies that we talk about, especially aside from like the really big tech companies. That's definitely up there.
Yep. Well, interesting little development or not so little development. It's interesting. Australia has an information commissioner, Angeline Falk, who talked about this, said that the deferred collection of this kind of sensitive information is unreasonably intrusive and unfair. And there's, various lawsuits going on in the US, including, I think, one by the ACLU against Clearview. So we'll have to see if a similar result happens here. But moving on to our fun stories away from all the serious stuff. First, we have AIBA, the International Boxing Association, uses AI technology to vet judges and refs at Belgrade Worlds. So it's kind of just what the story says. This association apparently is using AI to screen judges and referees to make sure that they are not gonna, lead to fight manipulations. So someone, agrees to take a hit and then the fight isn't real. And somehow the technology is analyzing cognitive functions of the brain through voice responses, and apparently bears no resemblance whatsoever to a lie detector test. So I was a little confused. Seems a little bit suspicious. What do you think, Sharon?
It sounds like it's doing the same thing as a lie detector test and is trying to be just like one of those. That's what it is. But, it sounds like a relatively harmless application. I don't know. There might be a lot of politics in this, so and influencing the Olympics might be actually a much larger thing. But yeah.
Yeah, this is certainly in part probably a PR move because this association got in trouble at the 2016 Rio Olympics. I think were suspended and were not able to take part in the latest Olympics. So possibly a little bit made up as far as the AI technology, but it's not hurting anyone. And, I guess maybe it's real, and then that would be quite impressive.
And on to our last article, Miso introduces second generation restaurant kitchen robot, the Flippy 2. All right, so Miso Robotics, very cute name. They make restaurant robots, and they just unveiled their, second generation of Flippy, which uses computer vision to help with operating a cooking station. So that can include, fryers and all that. This is the movement towards the future of AI and all of these, future of AI plus robotics in everyday kind of use. And looking at the photo of this robot really takes me back to when I was a waitress and did a lot of food things that I would love for the fryers to be automated because I didn't enjoy that as much. So great place for a robot. And there are a lot of menial tasks. That said, there are also, little bits and pieces that are, I would imagine, much harder to automate.
Yeah, wow. I didn't know you could relate to this area. I myself haven't had the pleasure, but I guess I can imagine how this would be nice. So apparently it's already been, or it's going to make its debut in White Castle's in Chicago 42 location. So it's actually going to be being used somewhere. And this was developed actually with kind of experience and overseeing from White Castle. So it's actually kind of, going to be in the real world. And by 2020, they hope to be in as many as 10 White Castle locations. You can check out the video. We'll link it in the description. It's kind of fun to look at. As you said, it takes care of frying things in the video. And it's a little funny. I saw they have QR codes on the handles. So I don't know how, they did simplify the problem a bit, but definitely.
You have to.
Yeah. It's a smart thing. They didn't try to do like a more super general robot to paint you a picture of this as an arm robot. So it has just this sort of a set of joints and a gripper. And it's actually attached to kind of like a ceiling area where it can drive back and forth on a single axis. So it can pick something up, move it left, move it right. And I imagine that already helps with a lot of stuff.
Right. And with that, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast. You can find the articles we discussed here today and subscribe to our weekly newsletter with similar ones at lastweekin.ai.
Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to leave us a rating and a review if you like the show. It would help us quite a bit.
Be sure to tune in next week.